So, Matt, what is your favorite festival you've ever been to?
Ooh, well, around the same time as what we're talking about today, I went in the summer of 2000. I went to 2001. I went to in the same summer in New York, in the same literally, I think they were a week apart. I went to Ozfest and Vans Warped Tour in New York, and the Vans Warped Tour lineup. Let me bring these up so I can actually tell you exactly who was on that stage. It was amazing. It was a few weeks before 9/11. So we went up the Trade Center. Went to as I was telling you at the weekend. Went to bloody Coyote Ugly. It was crazy. I was 20, just turned 21. So this is some of the lineup from the Warped Tour. AFI, Bouncing Souls, Dropkick Murphys, Less Than Jake, Me First the Gimme Gimmes, Rancid, the Ataris, Guttermouth, H2O, NoFX headlined, I think. So many incredible bands on that was just blew my fucking mind. And then so that was 1 week, and then I went to Ozfest. I was running a fanzine at the time with my friend, and we'd gotten quite in with Sonny. So I'd met Slipknot and Kitty and stuff when they played in the UK, and so through kind of knowing Kitty a bit, I made friends with other people, and so Ozfest in New York, summer 2001. That lineup was Sabbath, Slipknot, Papa Roach, Linkin Park, Disturbed, Crazy Town, Mudvayne, Spineshank, Drowning Pool. Actually, did they play? No, they weren't on the New York date. It was absolutely. Actually, it was New Jersey where we went to that. Absolutely astonishing lineup, all in the same day. It was so good.
And this is why you are perfectly primed to be cool for the kids again, because new metal is cool again.
Yeah, that's not going to last. I always say that, I'm going to enjoy this moment of revival of my youth when while it lasts, but it's not going to last very long.
Yeah, listen, the next time it's going to come around is when you're 60 and you can't really get in the pit then.
Exactly.
But on that topic, we have a really interesting.
What was yours before we get onto that? What was yours?
A few day festivals and stuff. I do have one coming up this year that I've been. So in Ireland, there's this thing called the Flacciole, which is a week-long Irish traditional music festival. It's just loads of music, lots of drinking, lots of fun. I've been meaning to go to it for the past couple of years, and especially since COVID. But this year, it's in my hometown, so I don't have to pay for accommodation, and I can just go for a week and go to my favorite pubs at home and hear brilliant music all week. So that's one I'm really excited for. But favorite ones in the past, no, don't really have any.
Oh, okay. Well, let's change that. Let's go to some gigs, Tom.
Yeah, well, we've already, I think we're going to see Less Than Jake soon enough. We'll be skanking, two-stepping. We'll be having all the fun. But before we get into our topic, you're very welcome to Beneath Skin, the show about the history of everything, told through the history of tattooing. I am one of your hosts, Thomas O'Mahony, and I'm joined as ever by my wonderful, delightful co-host, Dr. Matt Lauder.
Hello.
Yeah, so today we have a interesting story from around the turn of the millennium. Nu metal, big jeans, white people with dreadlocks were all the rage at the time.
Including me.
Including Matt. Unfortunately, I have seen the pictures of Matt in his Black Flag My War t-shirt and his white people dreadlocks. But we're talking about Tattoo the Earth, the tattooing traveling festival.
Yeah, well, Tattooing Traveling Festival, and then subsequently short-lived Tattoo Convention. It's sort of two different things. It's interesting that a lot of the online information about it, including the Wikipedia page, like mixes up a few different things. So it'd be nice to talk about it. Yeah, and it's something that, well, we'll get to it. It's super interesting. I was trying to find if anyone that I knew had been to it, but Kitty didn't play it. I asked. I'm still friendly with them online, and I reached out to Mercedes, who drums for Kitty, and asked her if they didn't play it. And my friend Steph, who I met at the Ozfest in that summer, I asked her yesterday if she was at it, and she didn't go either. So I couldn't find anyone who was there. So this is just going to have to be a historical account. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting. And as I was saying to you, right, like I'm literally just finishing up my next book, titled TBC. Hopefully we'll be able to confirm that in the next few weeks, actually, because it's going. The publisher are going to decide which one of the options that I'm proposing for a title they're going to go with. But anyway, as always with my work, I find it difficult to properly historicize anything that happened as history whilst I was already a historian. And so, you know, the tattoo world after the 2000s is difficult for me to conceptualize as the past, partly because I was there while it was happening. But what became clear when we talked about the idea for this episode a while ago, and so I've been thinking about it, and what became clear was this event that we'll talk about, this festival, Tattoo the Earth, which was in the summer of 2000, was actually a perfect illustration of like what was happening at the end of like the 90s, which was such a kind of important decade of transformation for tattooing, and why it's impossible to talk about tattooing in the same way after the millennium than it was before. Because I think probably in ways that the guy who organized the festival, Scott Alderman, didn't quite and doesn't quite realize. But it was really interesting illustration of, I think, what exactly was this kind of Rubicon for tattooing at the turn of the millennium. So that's what we're talking about. And I was saying to you before we started recording, it's become a really useful moment for me that the last section of the book, I was really struggling how to end it. And this section that we're writing about Tattoo the Earth and what happened with it and around it and why it came about and what worked about it and what didn't work about it, became just a really useful way of summarizing, I think, everything that I wanted to say about why it's impossible to write about tattoo history after 2000 in the way it was beforehand. So yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about it, also because you know, the lineup.
I'm looking at it right now. Are we talking about the musical lineup or the tattoo artists?
Well, the tattoo lineup we'll talk about a bit in more detail in a second, because the list on Wikipedia is confusingly not quite correct, but in ways that are interesting. But the event, which basically toured around the United States, starting in Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon, or is that Portland? No, that's Portland, Maine. Starting in Portland, no, it is Portland, Oregon. Starting in Portland, Oregon in July 15th, 2000, and then ending after a sort of series of legs, basically in Worcester, Massachusetts in October that summer. The bands are Slipknot headlining, basically, and then they brought on board some more kind of old school bands, I suppose, like Sepultura were on the tour, Slayer, Seven Dust, and then other kind of bands of the period. So you've got the full lineup is Slipknot, Slayer, Hed PE, Seven Dust, Sepultura, Cold Chamber, Puya, Hatebreed, Nashville Pussy, Downset, Mudvayne, Full Devil Jacket, and a few other kind of Amen, Nothing Face, Workhorse Movement, etc. That's the musical lineup.
Like the Slipknot kind of interests me. Slayer at that period, not really. Hatebreed in 2000 after releasing
I saw
Under the
them.
Knife.
Yeah, I saw them a few times at that time.
Yeah, you refuse to live your life under the knife.
I do. I had a Hatebreed windbreaker.
I'm so actually when you think, well, no, Hatebreed has too many letters. I was saying it could be the perfect, knuckle tattoo, but it's one letter too long.
Hate bread. Hate bread. Hate brood. Hate brie.
Fucking hate bread. Keto only.
Or hate brie. So
That's
the
that is you
lineup.
hate brie. You hate brie because you're vegan.
Hate brie. And then the idea was that alongside the bands, there would be a sort of caravan of tattoo artists as well. And on the tour, as we'll talk about in a lot more detail, the tattooers were Bernie Luther, Austrian tattooer who we were talking about, actually fell enough with Dan Gold the other day, Philip Liu, Gil Monty, Jack Rudy, Paul Booth, and Sean Velasquez. So they were the huge name tattooers, younger tattooers at the time like Liu and Booth, and older, more experienced legends of the industry like Rudy, traveling alongside the event, right? So that's, just that lineup is just on its own, like, just fucking incredible.
And I'm sure there was other people as well who dropped in for certain dates.
Yeah, and as I said, there is a sort of afterlife, which we'll get to, which other tattooers were involved with in 2002. So the guy that started this, or sort of was the mastermind for this event, is a guy called Scott Alderman, and Alderman had been in the music industry. He had been addicted to drugs, but he'd come out. He'd been sober for a long time, and he's written a book, which largely the information for this is going to come out of, called Caravan of Pain, like recounting what happened on this tour. It's worth reading and getting hold of the book. I think he's doing a podcast version of it as well. But he wasn't a tattoo guy really, which is sort of part of the problem. Although, so this is from the beginning of his book. He says, writing in at the time, writing in 2021 when the book came out, about 2000, tattoo was still underground 20 years ago. Right, another one of these. Still illegal still illegal in some states, and there was not a whole lot of mainstream personalities with tattoos. Look at a picture of the 2000 Olympic basketball team. Not a tattoo to be found. Which, if I remember correctly, Dennis Rodman was in that fucking team. So I'm just going to check that, because anyway, he says, yeah, not a tattoo to be found. If someone was a heavily tattooed back then, they were a hipster, a biker, a metal or hip hop musician, or a wrestler. Now the manager of my bank is covered in tattoos. It's mind blowing to see how ubiquitous tattooing has become. So he has the perpetual, not just for sailors idea, and he, it's so funny. So I said he's not a tattoo guy. He'd started getting tattooed, as I said, as a way of coming out of his own, to sort of mark his sobriety. And he'd got into tattooing through reading Modern Primitives, like so many of us did. He'd basically been given a copy of Modern Primitives, and he was a bit freaked out by the piercings and the body mods and all the Mr. Sebastian stuff. But he was really kind of interested in Lyle Tuttle in particular. And, it's one of the reasons why I think that this story became very useful for my book as well, because, Modern Primitives and Ed Hardy's Tattoo Time in combination, in ways which I'll explain in the book, it actually are really what are a huge transformation of the industry towards, through the 90s. And so he gets hold of Modern Primitives. He starts getting tattooed. He gets tattooed by Shotzi Gorman, for example, who's an amazing tattooer. He goes to the Philippines and gets tattooed. But he's not sort of, as I said, a sort of super tattoo industry guy. He'd made some money through being in business, but wanted to do something else. He talks about going to a tattoo convention. Let me read this to you because I think it's an interesting experience and one that I have had exactly the same one with the same guy at around the same time. So Scott went to a tattoo convention in New Orleans, and he said, "I've not been to a tattoo convention before." He got tattooed. He said, "My tattoo should have taken an hour, but I started feeling lightheaded and queasy." And then he said, a guy came by to say hello to Sean, Sean who was tattooing him, who was tattooed from head to toe. He was wearing shorts and no shirt, and there wasn't an inch of him that wasn't tattooed, including his face. There was so much it was hard to discern one image or piece from another. He had pus globules tattooed in his armpits that dripped down his arm. He was the freakiest person I'd ever seen, and he and Sean knew each other from going to tattoo conventions. At one point, the guy took his dick out to show Sean a checkerboard he had tattooed on it, and that's when I started feeling untethered. That guy, I am 100% certain, is a guy called Matt Gonn, who went on to cover his whole body in a checkerboard pattern and really made a habit of just showing his dick to people at tattoo conventions. He was at one of the tattoo conventions I went to in the early 2000s in London and did the same thing to me, showed me his tattoo dick. He also had a really weirdly high-pitched voice. It's a very strange experience. And so he says, my wife thought Mr. Checkerboard Dick was a loser. We were both relieved when Sean told us he thought the guy was completely nuts and fucked up and not representative of the tattoo community. I wasn't so sure, but it didn't matter. I was in the tattoo business and didn't see myself going to any conventions.
Interestingly enough as well, Matt Gonn has his tongue tattooed.
Oh, yeah. Have you looked him up?
Yeah. Safe search on.
He was an early eyeball tattoo client as well. Interesting guy. He also claimed to be the most tattooed person in the world, I think, for a while, and wasn't. And tried. I think did he try to? He might. Don't cite me on this directly, but I think he might have tried to sue Guinness, or there was a whole drama about whether or not he was the most tattooed person in the world or something. He was very, very odd. Anyway, so that was Scott Alderman's introduction to the tattoo community, if you like, the tattoo world, like meeting Matt Gonn, seeing his dick.
Do you ever see a dick so interesting you start your own festival?
Yeah, right. So Alderman's clearly got a kind of, he really kind of places himself in this kind of histrionic way at the center of history. And he sort of said, he said he wanted to, what he called what he went on to kind of try and call Woodstock for the body art generation. Right. He was like, everyone's getting into this shit. Like, I want to do a festival. I want to bring it into the mainstream. And he basically says, in his book, like, he told Sean that he wanted to create this festival. He was going to call it Tattoo the Earth. And then he said, I had clarity and purpose for the first time in my life. Right. Within days, I had a 20-page pitch book detailing my plan and a clear vision. It contained an overview of the festival, industry demographics, magazine ads, and celebrity photos featuring tattoos, which is weird because he said there weren't any tattooed celebrities. So, already. It was difficult finding ads featuring body art, and there were not many celebrities sporting tattoos. My list included Allen Iverson, also presumably an Olympic basketball player.
You don't know Allen Iverson?
No, I know who he is. I mean, he's a basketball player. I mean, like, jokingly, like, he said, remember that Alderman said there was no tattooed men in the no tattooed people playing in the USA basketball team. Actually, Allen Iverson, I'm looking at the rosters. Allen Iverson wasn't in that team, and neither was
Dennis Rodman.
Dennis Rodman. So apologies. Anyway, so then he says, so he also sort of said, he came up with this, like, he said it wasn't just a festival, it was going to be like a new industry. He was like talking about doing magazines, he was talking about doing like all kinds of things. And then he says, tattooing was barely above ground, barely in the mainstream, but I was going to change all that.
Oh, this guy sounds so annoying.
So he's been getting tattooed for like a couple of years, been to one tattoo convention, seen Matt Gon's dick, and is like, right, you know what the tattoo industry needs? Me. Yeah, that's a heavy-hearted sigh.
You know, if we had a pound for every person who said they're going to change the world and change tattooing, who had no idea about anything about tattooing, I feel like we'd have like £5.
Well, you know, it's interesting because, you know, this is also, funnily enough, I think one of the reasons that I think this is a really indicative moment is like a lot of this stuff that comes later on, you know, including the weird tattooing robots, which we're going to do an episode about, and all this kind of people really trying to turn tattooing into an industry. I mean, it always wasn't an industry, but I mean, in a kind of commercialized way. This is one of the kind of biggest examples of someone from outside the industry for the first time coming in and going, yeah, I'm going to do it. Right. He says in his book as well, my business career had just gone bust and I wanted to do something unusual, something never been done before. The greatest freak show ever, like a giant S&M Woodstock or a fest. Right. So yeah, he's got this kind of thing. And he doesn't really know anything about tattooing, but he knows what he wants it to be. And he knows, yeah, as I said, you know, he wants it to be this enormous, not just a festival, but you know, a kind of
cultural money
making machine. Yeah. So
and it's like it's super interesting as well because like in this like leading up to the millennium, there was like a whole lot of people who thought that like, oh, this kind of like social event thing that I'm going to do is going to like change the world. And I think it is a little bit of the hangover of a combination of stuff like, you know, Woodstock, but also stuff like Band-Aid and everything. It's like, you know, everyone thinks that they're going to leave their mark on the world, their own indelible mark on the world through some sort of festival.
Yeah, and I wonder, you know, he talks a bit about his drug addiction, but I wonder if it's also a symptom of, you know, obviously like a lot of addicts have a kind of messianism, and they use their sobriety if they are able to become sober, you know, as a way to kind of, you know, do something different, but with as much verve and as much passion as they'd done, you know, as they previously put towards drugs. So there's a kind of almost positive version of this. But yeah, I just think it's so, as I said, so indicative that he's clearly is excited by tattooing. You know, he's not a young guy at this point. I think he must be in his 30s at least. But he's clearly like, fuck, he just loves tattooing, and tattooing is amazing in this period of time, right? Like Ed Hardy and Rudy and Aitchison and Dan Higgs and Lau Hardy and all these, tattooing was really changing at this time, and he was kind of, you know, in the wake of this incredible moment of excitement. I said I remember because I was there too. I was also reading Modern Primitives in the mid to late 90s. I was also kind of seeing tattoo magazines, particularly coming out of America, with all this incredible work in it, and it was a very vibrant and thrilling time. And the music, you know, and the music scene was also a big for me, and so I can kind of understand his excitement. I get it because I was there at the time as well, but I wasn't, you know, I was obviously much younger than him, but he's taken that and sort of it's almost metastasized. Like he's got this absolutely kind of like out of control idea about this enormous set of interconnected projects that he's gonna create. So he doesn't really know anything about tattooing or know any tattooed people. He knows Sean Velasquez because he's been getting tattooed by him. He gets tattooed by Shotzi. But how's he going to make this happen? Well, as I said, he'd read Modern Primitives and was particularly inspired by Lyle Tuttle, original, you know, rock tattooer to the rock star elite. And of course, like, you know, Tuttle had been on the cover of Rolling Stone in 1970. He'd irritated the hell out of Sailor Jerry because, you know, he was more, you know, thought that he was a showman more than a tattooer, although of course he was an incredible tattoo artist, did so much for the industry, started you know, hosted the first international tattoo convention in Houston.
Is there have we ever talked about the Sailor Jerry Lyle Tuttle business card thing, or is that something we can talk about at all?
No, I think we did, but we can talk about that. We'll mention it again. I think we have talked about it, but like, yeah, Sailor Jerry hated Lyle Tuttle so much that when particularly annoying customers would get tattooed in Hawaii by Jerry, he'd give them a business card to say, "Oh, if you want to get this finished off, go and." If you're in San Francisco, go and see my friend Lyle. He'll tattoo you for free. Here's a voucher. knowing that they would go in and then like cause havoc for Tuttle because they'd be demanding free tattoos. Anyway, so basically that means Alderman basically says, I need to go and see Lyle Tuttle. So he goes to see Lyle Tuttle at a tattoo convention in Richmond. And Tuttle basically tells him to fuck off. It's so good. So I'll read this. I'll read this out from the book. So he said, Lyle listened patiently while I told him about the idea, barely looking at the pitch book. Other than the occasional snort, he looked at me with the excitement of a bored grandpa who was missing a discount frozen yogurt night at the mall. I told him about my background, my work in music, my corporate work, and how much tattoos meant to him. And then I told him this festival was going to be like Woodstock for the body art generation. The connection between tattoo artists, bands, and fans is powerful, forged in blood, ink, and music. I also want to tie in museums, academia, and mainstream sponsors to put tattooing at the forefront. All this is like the continuation of the work you've been doing your entire life. We want to take tattooing out of hotel ballrooms and put it in the middle of a massive cultural event. I want you to be part of it. Lyle said at the book, "You're completely full of shit," he bellowed. You think you'll get tattooists to work together to put aside their egos for something created by an outsider? Well, I am full of shit, I shot back. I think you need to be full of shit to pull off something like this. And yes, I think we can unite tattoo artists to work together with us. Tattoo artists, Lyle said, are all cocksuckers and copycats, and that will never change. Right. So Lyle Tuttle was like, absolutely, like, this is not going to work, you prick. Like, fuck off.
You are an absolute moron.
What do you think Alderman does next? What would you do if you'd been told to fuck off by Lyle Tuttle?
Oh, immediately go to someone who hates Lyle Tuttle.
No. Well, no, he doesn't do that. What he does do, Tom, is he goes to buy a leather jacket.
Oh my God, this guy is so much more worse than I thought.
I dropped $30,000 in the first weeks after having the idea. I put a lawyer on retainer and hired another law firm to do trademarking. I bought a mid-length black leather jacket like the one De Niro wore in Mean Streets, a new laptop and a cell phone, a pound of mind-blowing pot, all the things I'd need to travel the world in pursuit of my goal.
This man seems like he's having the most intense midlife crisis ever.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. He thinks the reason that Tuttle doesn't like him is because he doesn't look cool, that he's not a tattoo guy. So he goes and buys a leather jacket. And he also talks later on about similarly kind of dressing up. It reminded me of something I read in a management studies journal a long time ago, and it was by a PhD student, so I shouldn't criticize it too much, but they were trying to do a PhD on the business of tattooing. And every time they walked into a tattoo shop and asked them how much money they earned, a tattooist would also tell them to fuck off. And this student ended up writing a paper that was about, research ethics. And like, well, I even tried wearing Doc Martens and a Metallica t-shirt and they still wouldn't talk to me. And like, don't they know I'm an academic? Like, this is important research. And like, this sort of, it's completely missing the point about what the industry's issue with them was. Right.
Yeah.
And he basically thought, and I say it's sort of naive and well-meaning, and he seems like a prick, but I don't think it's sort of cynical. I mean, it is cynical, but it's not, he's not there thinking like, how can I exploit tattooing? He sort of genuinely thinks like, oh, tattooing's amazing. And like, wouldn't it be cool if we made millions and millions of dollars for everybody? And everyone should sort of hear about, it's a bit like messianic, but it's it's
also
completely
kind of
clueless in a really kind of almost sweet way.
yeah, and it's also kind of like missing a lot of points of like tattooing in that most tattoo artists aren't in it for the money. If you were in it for the money, you'd go do something else.
Certainly at that time, for sure. Yeah. So he he buys he buys a leather jacket. He also says Lyle was right. I'd approached him too soon before I knew what I was talking about. Right. So he then realizes like actually maybe the way to start this is to actually talk to some people other than Tuttle. So he actually goes to Europe and meets Bernie Luther. He meets Philip Lou. He meets Tintin. He goes to this convention in Berlin, basically, which was also very exciting for him. But he also thinks I'm going to have to get bands involved. So he goes to Berlin. He meets Bernie Luther. Luther was less dismissive of him and actually kind of excited about the project. And yeah, it begins to come together. So he also ends up, again, this is a kind of idea. This is a quote. Just such an illustration of where his mind's at. Right? So he's now gone to meet a couple of other tattooers, and again, like seeing people like Bernie Luther and Philip Lou and Tintin working in 2000, I'm sure was an absolute like incredibly intoxicating thrill. He says, I'd envisaged tattoo and retail shops, a cartoon series called That Squad, Tattooed Heroes Against Tyranny, about a group of inked superheroes whose tattoos come to life and help them fight evil in the universe. One character was a Jewish accountant whose portrait of his mother came to life and annoyed enemies. I came up with a magazine called Ink Gun, a website called Tat.chat, and a plexiglass tattoo booth with giant Lego-like modules called FestiPod that I designed to travel on the road, and I made a miniature prototype in my basement. Right,
but this fully is like the energy of an addict.
Yeah, yeah, it's just manic. Like it's like a montage scene in a movie.
Also, like calling it Ink Gun is like one way to like mark yourself out that you don't know anything about tattoos.
Exactly. He also hooks up with Stuart Silfen, who'd been involved in Woodstock on the kind of music side of things. I think he'd also been involved with that weird like Woodstock 99 as well, right? I think that's the same guy. Which, if you haven't seen that Netflix documentary about how fucking insane and badly that all went. So yeah, he puts together the show, the event, and basically like, yeah, he basically thinks like, how am I going to make this happen? He said, my original research was for a 3-day festival, but a marketing research company I hired told me these type of multi-day festivals were going out of style. Despite the success of Lollapalooza, there's always a risk of people are sleeping over and weather could ruin it. Riots broke out at Woodstock 99. Tours were safer because you had multiple shows to overcome the bad ones. And yeah, he eventually thinks like, okay, I'm going to do a tour. I've spoken to the marketing guys. I bought my leather jacket. At least like Luther in particular seems to be interested, and I'm going to get some bands involved. And he finally basically manages, as I said, to persuade Slipknot to headline. They tried some other bands actually. They reached out to Cypress Hill, who performed at Woodstock 99. They'd reached out to Metallica, who ended up also, as I said, ended up signing on. They reached out to Kid Rock, Red Hot Chili Peppers, all kinds of people.
And it's ironic because like the Red Hot Chili Peppers already have like a tattoo connection through Hanky Panky.
Yeah, well, Hanky Panky comes back into this story in a really fucking amazing way.
Okay, I'll hold that.
Oh, hold that thought. Right. So, yeah, long story short, they eventually put this line together that we mentioned at the beginning, and they sign on those tattooers. They sign on Hanky Panky. They sign on Paul Booth. They sign on Lou. They sign on Benny Luther. They sign on Sean Vasquez, who was the kind of tattooer who'd got him into all this in the first place. They tried to sign Hanky Panky.
Okay.
So Henk was initially in. Right. And I think that would have been a real coup because obviously Henk's in Modern Primitives as well. Right. So I think Henk would have been a real coup for the show. But he basically said, can I bring my dog? And Scott went, well, not really. Like, that would be just really logistically difficult and like kind of annoying because we're going to be in buses and like, yeah, you really can't like bring your dog with you. And so Hanky quit.
Dead right.
He liked the idea. He thought the kind of Modern Primitives fanboying was interesting.
But I think as well, like it's not like the whole idea for like what is essentially a traveling like tattoo convention / music festival is really interesting, and I think it's an idea that could work, just not done by this guy.
It's not done by this guy. Well, so he says our roster of tattoo artists was formidable. Unfortunately, Henk Schiffmacher wasn't one of them. He sent me an email with ideas about how the tour bus should be a hangout and became insulted when I told him his dog wouldn't be able to come on board. I liked Shatsy, his dog, but if anyone was bringing a dog, it was going to be me, and I wasn't bringing one. Henk replied with a diatribe about what insult it was and how he was the only one that could represent tattooing and knew tattooing and so on. When I showed the email to other tattoo artists, they voted Henk off the tour. His ego was going to be a challenge on the road, but I wanted him there, and now that wasn't going to happen.
Interesting.
I don't think that is true. My sense is that Henk quit, and this is everyone else hated him as well because of what happens next as well, right? So, and how this all turns out, and Tuttle's warnings here ringing in our ears, right? Of like terrorists all hate each other, and they're all copycats and cocksuckers. Paul Booth is the next person we should talk about. Now, Paul Booth, we mentioned him when we talked to Miroslava about HR Giga, this absolute kind of legend of black and grey. Again, probably one of the most famous tattooers in the world at the time.
If anyone listening knows Paul, please ask him to come on the show.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be amazing. I'm sure we know people that know him. He was this incredible figure. But it's clear that him and Scott Alderman didn't get on. Essentially, one of the reasons that the tour ends up not really working out so well is that like Booth essentially kind of falls out with Alderman, right? So he said, that basically the tour ended up being 90% music, 10% tattooing. That there wasn't much space for the tattooing. It was a bit of an afterthought. It's really difficult and probably a bad idea to tattoo people in that environment of a touring thing without good hygiene, with people that are pissed. The culture at the time as well. Again, if anyone's seen that Woodstock '99, the culture of metal fans was pretty toxic. It was just like not a nice experience, and it wasn't set up for artists to tattoo in a very straightforward way. A lot of the artists ended up just tattooing people on the tour bus and tattooing other bands, and therefore not being available to tattoo the clients. Booth basically like threatens to quit. He threatens to leave the tour, and Alderman says something which I think is super interesting. Like he says, let me get the exact quote up. He basically says, he said Paul Booth could have been replaced by any other competent and unknown artist. Right?
Yeah, sure. Are you sure about that?
Are you sure about that? And I think that for me, when I was putting this together, that for me was like really indicative of, I think, of another one of the problems of Alderman's like mindset, because he sees tattooing as a business, and he loves tattooing in some senses, right? Like he loves tattooing as a kind of, for its vibe, for its kind of energy. But he seems to not really care about any individual tattooer. He seems to just see them as kind of like means to an end rather than any particular talented artist in his own right. Because for him, tattooing is this, to use my phrase as always, like a phenomenon. It's not something that has an individual specificity where the artists are artists in their own right. It's almost like that. Again, to talk about that black dot tattooing robot thing. It's like the thing people want is a tattoo, and not a tattoo from some specific individual artist.
Yeah,
I don't think that's true. He said Booth was the most temperamental artist on the tour, and the reality was I could replace him with any competent unknown artist, and it wouldn't affect the box office. Booth came over with Gil, Monty, and Jack Rudy. And I snapped, "You fat fuck." I snapped at Booth, "I'm done with your shit." Gil Monty said I couldn't talk to Booth like that, and Booth was acting up in arms, and I could see where this is heading. They followed me and were joined by body piercers and Sean. They were surrounding me. Gil said I couldn't fire Booth, and I told them they were all fired. Sean wouldn't make eye contact with me. This is a really old friend of his, and I fired him too. This was the outsider bullshit Lyle Tuttle had warned me about. Sean had no choice but to go along with it. It felt like Booth had orchestrated the whole thing. So yeah, basically, like, this guy thought that he could like corral all these tattooers. He didn't. Like, he was also one of the main flashpoints was this bus had a big back lounge, and Alderman had the back lounge. Why do you get the back lounge on the tattoo artist bus? Gil asked me one day. Why do you get the privilege? Because I paid for it, I told him. You pay for the bus, you can have the back.
Like, this guy has like a fundamental misunderstanding of like a big thing with, when you are like friends and associate with tattoo artists is like there has to be a certain amount of like mutual respect in order for them to, one, trust you, but also like you, and especially do business with you. Like, tattoo artists are like quite often fucked over by like clients, various people, whatever, and like especially like at this time, like tattooing as a culture is like, it's a little bit insular as well. So it's like, well, why should we trust you? You're just kind of like a walk-in. And this guy just like fundamentally doesn't get it. And he's like, I fronted the money. You should listen to me. I'm your boss.
And you should be grateful, right, to me for giving you all this exposure. And he also talks about so Bernie Luther and Philip Liu had left the tour at a halfway point, and that's when Jack Rudy and Gil Monty had come along, and they were obviously older than Liu in particular. And he felt, I think, the way Alderman tells us in his book is it's a generational shift, and he sort of says like these young guys are kind of cool and understood what I was trying to do, but these old guys, like, he said, Gil and Jack fed into Booth's shit, right? Like,
I think it's just they've been around long enough to recognize a fucking huckster.
That's it, right? So it's the show is like, the shows are good, but it's expensive. It's not making him or anyone a ton of money. They didn't sell huge amounts of tickets, partly because, again, it's a busy period. Like I said, I went to the Vans Warped Tour and Ozfest the year after. There was huge tours, like Ozfest was touring, Vans was touring, the Woodstock show had happened the year before. Like, people, you were sort of spoiled for choice in a way, and this was, bad. Like he said, in the Rio Grande Valley, they barely sold 3,000 tickets. There was no way we could break even. I was never going to make money. And like, so the tattooists are annoyed because it's just not a nice experience. Alderman himself is starting to take painkillers because he's in pain. So, there was members of Slayer got arrested, like all kinds of crazy stuff. And it was just, doesn't sound like a very nice thing. And clearly, like, the tattooers are like, I think particularly Rudy and Gil, as you said, they realize probably that this was just a way to use their cultural capital to give some branding to something that they weren't really part of and they weren't really involved with. And by a guy that didn't understand what he was getting himself in for, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, 8 of 18 shows, ticket sales for 6 has been strong. 6 okay, 6 weak. Equals painful in their own way. We overpaid all the main stage bands. Everyone, so many people told me how rich I was going to be, but I hadn't cared about money. If money was what I cared about, I would have stayed at my corporate job. I was trying to build a movement, an industry to change the world. But of course, yeah, that's not what happened. He also ends up, as I said, sort of really getting overwhelmed by Ozfest in particular. The following year, he tried to do a tour the following year in 2001, but really Ozfest had sort of stolen his lunch, and he gave it up really. The other thing that happened in 2001 was that there was a UK tour with many of the same bands, including Slayer, called Tattoo the Planet. And it sounds exactly the same, but it's completely unaffiliated.
I'm sure that Alderman was very excited about this.
Well, he said, I was in denial for a while. I think there was going to be some way to salvage my 2001 tour. But as soon as I accepted the concept as I envisioned it was over, and as it turned out plagiarized. Agency Group still miffed at us for messing with Slipknot. So Agency Group are another promoting company. Decided to launch Tattoo the Planet in Europe in fall 2001 with Slayer and Pantera headlining. I own the trademark in the US, but not Europe. And there was nothing I could do but go on MTV and rant. It was like coming down from a great drug trip or going limp during great sex or waking up from an amazing dream. Funnily enough, the Tattoo the Planet tour is in Europe. The first date, by the way, Tom, of Tattoo the Planet was going to be in Dublin on September the 13th, 2001.
What could have been? God damn you, Muhammad Atta.
Yeah. Irish metal fans are the real victims there. But Pantera were already in Europe, and for example, 9/11 happened. The bill was going to be Cradle of Filth, Static X, Biohazard, Vision of Disorder, Raging Speedhorn, Slayer, and Pantera.
That is an incredible lineup.
Yeah. But of course, the 9/11 happened. Tim Williams of New York's Vision of Disorder said in an interview with Louder Sound magazine, on either 9th or 10th of September, we flew out to Dublin because we wanted to get there early. We were going to party it up. We were on our bus picking up some drums from the rental place. Suddenly, Brendan comes running into the bus and shouts something about planes striking the freaking towers. Thousands, while the events were playing out in the States and being broadcast across the world, the widespread shock and sadness in the UK, life was continuing as normal. That evening, we had Alien Ant Farm playing at the LA2. Where were you on 9/11?
I was in school because I was 6 years old.
I was packing to go back to university because I'd just come back from New York, and some people were watching Alien Ant Farm at the LA2.
The contrast, the brilliant moment of seeing Alien Ant Farm live, disturbed by one of the most world-changing events of the 2000s.
And this is funny. So Tim Williams from Vision of Disorder says, we were told the first night in Ireland was going to be going ahead. Because all the flights that had been cancelled, only us and Pantera were there. So it was going to be us and Pantera, right? Just a Vision of Disorder and Pantera gig. What a dream. We were sat in this arena on the day of the show, looking at the stage that was set up with Pantera's gear and thinking we were about to do this huge thing. And suddenly people start coming on and taking their backline down. What the hell? The Cowboys from Hell, the hardest band in the world, they bowled it.
Cowards. And Phil Anselmo's a fucking Nazi as well, so.
I saw Pantera play in, must have been maybe the year after this, 2002. And Phil Anselmo was so fucked up he couldn't remember any of the words to any of the songs. They were supported by Static X, actually, Pantera and Static X, and like Phil Anselmo is one of the worst gigs I've ever seen because he literally could not fucking remember any words to any lyrics.
That's not surprising at all.
Yeah. So the Tattoo the Planet tour did actually go ahead in the end, but mainly with just European bands. So Therapy, Napalm Death, Skin Dread, Defenestration, who were like a sort of band out of the same scene as Raging Speedhorn. $65,000 were lost on ticket returns. So that never happened, and it also, I think, probably dissuaded Alderton from pursuing the event again in the US. However, and this is where some of the confusion comes, I think, on the online Wikipedia page for Tattoo the Earth, is because what he did do instead is the following year, in 2002, he relaunched the Tattoo the Earth brand, but as a tattoo convention instead of as a
traveling show,
as a traveling show, and with no music, and to just be about tattooing. And that again doesn't really work because he tries to do it in arenas. He tries to do 3-day festival kind of music festival kind of thing, but for a tattoo convention. So to do this enormous tattoo convention in these cavernous arenas, he ends up basically doing one in California, and one in Chicago, one at the Allstate Arena in Chicago, and one at the Coliseum Arena in Oakland. They're sponsored by Clear Channel, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's very antithetical to the rebel lifestyle of tattooing.
Yeah, but by this point, like even Tuttle, even Booth, who with whom Alderman makes a kind of peace pact with, want to get on board because it is this huge thing. And I think you can see that Tuttle and some of the other artists who get involved become enamored with just the scale of it. And because it's just about tattooing, and it's less kind of obviously cynically using tattooing as a brand for something else. So these shows, again, Alderman said, like, they're financially, they tanked. Attendance are okay, but not for an arena. And of course not. Like, you're not filling out an arena. But like, the list of people that were there include, for example, Ed Hardy, include Lyle Tuttle, include Paul Booth, include like this roster of tattooers that is just like, this is the Wikipedia list that's given for it from their own website, right? We've got people we've talked about on the show: Carrie Barber, Chuck Eldridge, Grimy, Corey Miller, Tintin, Guy Aitchison, Benoit, Horitoshi, Shige, Bob Tyrrell, Leo Zulueta, Mario Barth, Joe Capobianco, Anil Gupta, Robert Hernandez, Philip Liu, Aaron Bell. Like, incredible! What a tattoo convention lineup! I mean, as I said, this was the period when I was getting into tattooing, and this is like the list of all the most incredible tattooers in the world at the time. But again, tattooing can't fill a stadium, and this is where I come to in the book, and why I think in my book, when I've written about this, and why I think it's useful, because I think, like, it is true that tattooing had become big, and the fact that this was even vaguely possible is interesting. I think Alderman's story of him making this happen is not, he's getting the timeline wrong. I think he's riding on the back of something that's already happening. But as this story with Booth proves, I think you can't really turn tattooing into a mass market arena filling industry, because tattoos are not like other products. You have to sit there and be tattooed. Every tattooist, no matter who they are, if they're Paul Booth or Ed Hardy or Kat Von D or anyone, they've still only got the same amount of hours in the day to tattoo someone. And a tattoo by one artist is not the same as a tattoo by another for people who love tattooing. In cases, so you can't quite combine a generalized cultural interest in tattooing with a culture that has individual tattooists as real rock stars because whilst Slipknot or Slayer can play to an arena of thousands and thousands and thousands of people, Paul Booth can tattoo one person at a time.
Yeah.
And that ain't ever going to change. And I think that mismatch is, it's part of this reason why, the not just for sailors cliche persists anyway. It's because tattooing, even when it has some form of cultural cachet and cultural acceptability, it doesn't ever quite mesh with mainstream culture. But of course, that's also why it's interesting for culture, because it's always going to have a little bit of edge, a little bit of subcultural bite. We do this podcast, I've Got a Career, because people are interested in tattooing because it's cool to some degree.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, the normal instincts of corporate culture and people like Scott Alderman, even if they love tattooing deeply, who want to turn it into some mass corporate thing, it can't really ever be that, because fundamentally tattooing is a one-on-one, time-bound, limited, intimate practice. So that's where I come to, right? Like, tattooing becomes enormous and incalculably complicated in terms of the personalities after this period, right? Like, it was so interesting to me to see characters that I've written about in the book and their influence, but including Jack Rudy in particular, but Tuttle and Hardy as well, be part of this moment when it, on the one hand, it becomes enormous, but on the other hand, it doesn't work. And the reasons it becomes enormous, but also doesn't quite work, are, I think, indicative of, what the culture of tattooing looks like now. As you said, even 20 years on, there's still people, entrepreneurs, capitalists, trying to do things like this with tattooing. And it never works because it can't. And I think that's the lesson, right, of like this kind of, as Alderman himself, he calls it a glorious failure, or a fiasco of a failure, because he did try and do something that he didn't really understand from a place of love, probably, not even probably, yes, but not from a place of understanding, and from really fundamentally misunderstanding. To say like, I could get rid of Paul Booth and replace him with anyone else is just not true, is it? Like, it's obviously not true if you understand even the basics of what we're talking about here. And I think, it becomes this, in the epilogue of my book, becomes a kind of cautionary tale or an illustration of why tattooing is never going to be as big as it gets, as popular as it gets, as mass market as it gets, as famous as some individual tattooers get, as much money as some individual tattooers make. You're never going to fill an arena.
I think that is the perfect point to leave it. I think, it says a lot about I think tattooing as a culture will always kind of be a bit antagonistic towards like outright commercialism, as much as like, people make money, people get successful, people get high profiles. There's always that inherent friction between it, because it is the one-on-one practice, but also the fact that like it is a culture that to engage with it is to intentionally set yourself apart from everyone else, like by, visually marking yourself. But with that out of the way, want to thank all of you for listening to the show. As always, we give a shout out to our £10 and above patrons. If you're listening to this, you are a patron. Thank you very much. You're one of our £5 and above patrons. If you're listening to this on a pirated copy, maybe consider supporting the show. So without further ado, let's see if I can
I want to set a Patreon goal here, right?
Okay, is this the one that you have to do?
Well, yeah, so this is something at the end of Alderman's book, he says, I have ideas for new tours. One is called Armageddon on Ice. It would be a fucked up ice capades for metal fans with live music, mutant hockey, and zombie figure skating. So if we get 1 million subscribers, we should fund Alderman to make Armageddon on Ice, his fucked up ice capades with mutant hockey and zombie figure skating.
That will be the biggest tax write-off I will ever have. But before Matt interrupted me, Matt, let's see if I can do this in one breath. 3, 2, 1. Stephen McCann, Roy Hoxham, Morpheus Ravenna, Chris Block, Charlie Lightning, Baba of Extra, Shit Jesus, Schiff, Lupe Calderon, Garnica, Kirsten Wright, Kathleen Burkhardt, James Schick, and Dylan. One breath. Thank you very much. If you enjoyed this episode, maybe share the show with a friend. Let's see if we can push me to a risk of dying having to read out those patrons. But once again, check us out on Instagram, Beneath Skin Pod. We've been posting some cool shit up there, like the only surviving Tom Riley art. There's some cool pics of me and Matt coming soon as well. And as we've been saying lately, Brighton, the 24th and 25th of February, come find us. We'll have a booth. We'll be sharing cool history stuff. So with that out of the way, thank you very much from me.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.